All right, Bruce Sidlinger's with me, and Bruce, it's my fault. You haven't been on the program this year, which is just unheard of.
I think it's my fault because I declared a sabbatical.
You're like, it's hopeless. I think we text all the time, right? But the text regarding coming on the show, you're like, I don't know, this is all hopeless now. There's nothing we can do to fix it.
It's kind of like, I don't know. It's very frustrating to explain something to someone who doesn't want to hear or is not capable of listening. Like, we're not developing critical thinkers. And so when you have people that aren't critical thinkers, then you can make a statement of fact and they just reject the fact. And somebody will just reject the fact that you can demonstrate. Like, I don't know, it was just, when they were going after Rhonda McDaniels, I know we're not doing politics today, but when they're going after Rhonda McDaniels yesterday, they were saying, AOC, I think this morning or yesterday, AOC said, Trump, she said something outrageous. I've never been fully in the tank for Trump just because I prefer a different kind of personality. But she said something completely outrageous. Like, she just said, it's a statement of fact that Trump completely arranged for an insurrection, and he called for it, and she was speaking that way as if there was video that she was going to play. The thing is, when people just accept things non-critically, when there's a lack of skepticism, like, I want everybody to be skeptical. I'm skeptical. Like, I'm completely skeptical of the claims that Key Bridge ship.
Oh, the cargo ship that hit it. Yeah.
That was.
It was, or that it wasn't.
Yeah, Lara Logan immediately said, "Oh, it's a terrorist attack," and I said, "Very unlikely. That would be a very." That just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not in the tank for anybody. I just immediately ask questions.
Bruce, I want to just say something. I am skeptical of everything. I think we share that trait.
And I've been proven wrong before because I'm always the moderate. Remember, I was your token leftist, right? I'm always the moderate, and I don't quickly jump on conspiracy theories. But from an engineering standpoint, that would be way too iffy. That would be too difficult a way to bring down a bridge. You've got two pilots on board. Pilots are chosen at the last minute. They wouldn't be part of it.
Yeah.
So the only way to do it would be to disable the ship intentionally, without knowing, somebody in the engine room disabling the ship intentionally without the pilots knowing.
At the right time.
There's absolutely no guarantee that the ship would drift into the bridge support. It seems ridiculous.
It seems, Bruce, when I saw it, I was just like, it hit the main support pylon. The whole thing's going down.
Yeah.
No big surprise.
Right. I'm disappointed that Lara Logan, when she first appeared in the scene, I said, man, she's beautiful and intelligent and cool. But she was attacked. She was attacked in the Middle East. And remember, she dropped off the scene for a few years, and that really changed her. I think was profoundly damaged by this attack. But boy, it's although I'm not completely against Lara Logan. I don't follow her though, because she seems to be given to quick judgments, and she used to be more disciplined as a journalist.
You know what I didn't like, and I talked about it on the show yesterday, Bruce. Right away, the experts, quote, I'm doing big air quotes on the experts, came out regarding the Port of Baltimore, right? And basically, they framed it in a way that we were all about to starve because of that port being closed, and that we weren't going to get trucks and coal and this and that, because the Port of Baltimore is a big port. But right away, it was this apocalyptic thing. And granted, those things can absolutely happen. But my thought yesterday was, no, they're going to continue to search for these people. And sadly, they called off the search because the water was 40-something degrees after 12 hours or whatever. They're going to clear it, and they're going to figure this out. This is not a world-ending black swan event. But many in the media right away painted it as this is it. And we're a little more resilient than taking out one bridge.
Incidentally, I've done a lot of criticism of government incompetence, but I was extremely impressed by how government functioned for that event. They got that bridge cleared. I remember a long time ago, there was an earthquake in Los Angeles that broke a bridge. And then there was this horrifying video of a motorcycle that didn't know, just driving on the interstate and coming to the end of the interstate about 80 feet up, one of those clover
Oh,
leaves.
yeah.
Well, that could have happened times 100 on that bridge. I mean, that's a very busy interstate, and I mean, even in the middle of the night, they were stopped a lot of traffic
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
going to cross that bridge, and they didn't have a single car go. You saw where it just ends. It just ends midair. They didn't have a single car go over that because they got that road closed, and even after police defunding and stuff, somehow they managed to get there in a very short amount of time and make the right decision. And they even thought to get the workers off, but they didn't get the workers off. In fact, we almost lost one extra person because one brave first responder said he was going out to get the workers. Yeah. That would have been an extra loss. Right after he said, I'm going to get the workers, a few seconds later, they radioed. If you haven't heard the radio transcript, it's worth listening to because it was 100% professional, really professional. And so, boy, occasionally, I mean, that gives you an idea of how great the first responders are at the rank and file level. You know, they really knew what to do.
And I think that we have a lot of great folks that work within the government, Bruce. But you and I and many others, our problems are oftentimes with the huge bureaucracy and the bureaucracy heaven and the thinkers that are out there thinking up stupid stuff. But we tend to forget about, or I try not to forget about, the people keeping the sewer lines flowing, the people keeping the streets clear, the people picking up the trash, the people, keeping the highways and the bridges and stuff, and the first responders. If we could just get to that core group and focus on them and maybe fire the other half, we would be pretty good as a nation. But I don't see that coming.
I mean, there are a lot of very competent people here, and it's just one thing. If I was in a debate with AOC, for example, about whether the left or the right are more law abiding, because her argument would be that the right are lawless, right? The lawless insurrectionists. I would say, the right has all the resources. People on the right are running everything. And they have a lot of the money and they have all the resources. And yet they're so law abiding that you guys can do anything you want with impunity because the people that were raised with good parents in a culture of responsibility and studied useful skills, they don't know how to play that game. They just know how to go to work and do their job.
Yep.
And
exactly.
so the strongest argument I believe that America is exceptional, is fundamentally good. I believe that traditional Americans are fundamentally good. I think that there are bad people versus good people. I've always been really clear on this point. And like I said, it's this argues itself that the fundamentally good people, no matter how much crazy stuff is going on, no matter how much of their tax dollars, for example, are being diverted from first responding to offices of DEI. Like, it's not Baltimore, is it Pittsburgh that is essentially closing their police department after 2 a.m. now? They're closing all the precincts. But they still have a big DEI department going on, but they're down to 8. I think it's 8 officers for all of Pittsburgh
at 2 a.m. Nothing bad happens at 2 a.m.
Yeah, but I mean, the people. We used to say nothing good happens after midnight. But in Pittsburgh, I mean, that police chief said nothing bad happens after 2 a.m.
All the best people are out at that time.
Right, they just put call boxes out. Yeah. But I mean, the point is, no one in the right wing opposition would even consider not paying their taxes. They're not like saying, guess what, we're not paying property taxes anymore. Mm-hmm. And if you try to make us, we'll quit doing all the services you need, like plumbing and electrical and whatever, and running power plants. They're not saying that at all, and I'm not proposing that because
you have said before everyone should go on strike and the country would be fixed real quick. Legally. Yeah.
Now, I've never proposed not paying taxes because that wouldn't be legal. But the point is, it's not just me. Everyone that was raised as a traditional American, raised as part of this greatest country in the world that's brought more prosperity and more health advances and more everything else to the whole world. We are that shining city on the hill that helps the whole world. If we didn't take in a single immigrant or export a single physical product, just the fact that we share our healthcare knowledge, we'll end up curing cancer and telling the whole world how to cure cancer. We're like aliens that land with
good intentions. With the good intentions,
right.
Yeah.
We're the our shining city on the hill is like the alien spaceship that lands with all the answers.
And that doesn't blow us all up. Well, Bruce, I was in Europe for 2 weeks. In the past couple of shows, I've done at least a segment or discussed quite a bit about why I am bullish on America long-term. Short-term and mid-term, no, because we've got a disaster right now. But you've traveled a lot internationally, although you haven't done so in a while, and we'll get to that when we talk about airlines and all that. But when you go to other countries, you get a perspective. And even as jacked up as we've become, they are so much further down the jacked up scale. They never got off the being jacked up scale, a lot of these countries.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
so you come back and you're like, hey, yeah, we got the greatest thing going on in the world. Let's not screw it up.
Well, until recently, most countries would sell you a citizenship. Like we could eliminate our entire. If we had sold as many citizenships as we're giving away right now at the southern border, we could have made the national debt zero. We've got $30 trillion worth of citizenships to sell. Most countries want between like 6 and 10 million for a citizenship. They've mostly quit selling them now because of political pressure. But in the old days, you could buy a citizenship almost in any country. And so the point is, if I had been willing to liquidate my U.S. real estate, I could have bought a citizenship to any country. But there's never, and I've been to lots and lots and lots of countries. There's not one I was willing to trade for. I mean, so it's just like I have so many cars that I can honestly give you an answer about whether Ford versus Chevy is better, because I've got plenty of both. Well, I can give you an objective answer about which country is better, because I've been to most of, not most of them, but a whole bunch of them.
Oh, yeah.
And I could have moved to any of them and obtained a citizenship just by buying one or starting a business in those countries. And this was still my choice, which is why we have to fix it. It's the last country. We can't let it. Hey, look, Bruce, let this one go.
I've never not come back
funny,
from.
This is supposed to be our non-political.
No, and we'll get up to that. I've never not gone to a. I've never not gone to a trip or a country and come back to U.S. after a week or two and said, oh, I'm moving. I wish I was there. Now, there's been some beach type places where I'm like, I could see being here for, a certain amount of time, for maybe months at a time as a secondary condition. But if you were just making it, that's for people who have money. You can go to it and you can live in the walled off place or the Waldorf, and you could, you can also buy the help, buy the security and all that. Right, and live in the best areas. That's for people with money. If you want to make it, though, you're not going to go. I just got back from Turkey and Istanbul. I thought it was awesome. I love the history. I'm a history nerd. But I'm not going to go. I have
lots of friends in Cappadocia, because Cappadocia is the biggest ballooning center of the world.
I really want to get into inland Turkey. A whole nother discussion there. Did you get
that picture I sent you of the balloons in Cappadocia?
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And then you start getting into the Mesopotamian era there.
For the listeners, I think it's Cappadocia, and just Google Cappadocia balloons, and it's the most beautiful hot air ballooning. You can't even believe it. It looks
more
like
than Albuquerque.
Oh yeah, it looks, It looks Cappadocia balloon. Do you remember that movie? I can't remember the name of the movie, but these movies that occasionally come out that are just set in a fantasy land where everything is like.
This ain't real.
Even try to be.
It's like CGI. You think it's CGI, but it's real.
Because it's right. Well, Cappadocia is like a CGI version of what heaven would be, but it's got balloons in it, and it's a real place. So
Turkey balloons. Is something. Yeah. No, I'll go back there, but the jet lag and the time change.
The one thing I always have to say, whenever Turkey comes up, I always have to say that I don't like them being in NATO. I don't think it's.
Yeah. Well, that's another hour discussion about NATO in general.
It's just like, sometimes, culture matters. I've defined culture before as just the way we do things around here, right? That's what culture essentially means. It's the way we do things around here.
Yeah.
Well, when you put completely disparate cultures into a club, then the club becomes meaningless. And I don't understand Turkey and NATO, and I don't understand what's going on in the UN.
That's why Turkey never became a member of the EU. Too culturally different, but to be a member of NATO is interesting because across the Aegean Sea from Turkey is Greece. The Greeks and Turks hate each other.
Yeah,
hate
right.
each other with a passion. I mean, there's the potential for them to be at it at any time over different islands and stuff. So it's like, NATO is like isn't the slogan like attack on one is an attack on all?
Yeah, right.
Well,
Right.
what if they attack they attack each other? I mean, we've joined with these NATO civil war. Yeah. And it's like we have these entangling alliances, and especially you look at the EU and NATO in general, all these countries are so different. And a lot of them don't like the Greeks and the Germans don't like each other. There's all this kind of animosity and hatred that's in there.
Although there is still, there is, now I haven't traveled recently because I quit when the Concorde crashed. That was the end of commercial air travel for me. But until then, I used to take the Concorde and go lots of places. I could define who should be in NATO just by walking around and eating at a few restaurants, and I can say, okay, this is our kind of place.
Yeah,
and I'm
similar
not saying
culture.
Other places aren't. I'm not saying other places aren't equally great, because there are lots of other, like Japan can be amazing. Other places are amazing, but it's pretty obvious that America, Great Britain, and Western Europe are all kind of the same deal.
Yeah,
and we could all be in one country, and it would be pretty easy to sort out. There's a kind of a Magna Carta-esque thing going on, certainly between Great Britain and us, but there's also that kind of similar concepts of rule of law elsewhere, like France and Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Even though even though they share a law system that kind of, obviously Louisiana is able to coexist with the 49 other states in the United States, even though the laws are derived from French law there.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's
it's similar
kind of thing.
Yeah, but you go to Turkey and other places, you are in a different world, and that's why I wanted to bring my kids there to experience that. Okay, well, Bruce is with us, and Bruce is a pilot. Bruce is my aviation expert. Bruce, why don't you give me your, ratings and kind of your
you always downgrade me. You always
I know.
Me.
I know. Well, Bruce is of the highest level. Give me your credentials.
I'm an airline transport pilot, commercial helicopter pilot, commercial seaplane pilot, commercial balloon pilot, commercial glider pilot, advanced ground instructor, flight instructor. Guess that's it.
Yeah. No rockets though. You're
everything
slacking.
Except
You're slacking.
I don't have airship, and I don't have gyrocopter, and so pretty much everything obtainable other than airship and gyrocopter.
Airship would be like a blimp.
Yeah, so I can fly hot air balloons, but that's different than a blimp.
Yeah, and people have personal blimps all over the place.
and I did some engineering on the Goodyear blimp a long time ago, and I said, you've got to let me, and they let me fly it all through my project, and it's not that hard. It wouldn't have been anything for me to solo the blimp. I said, please let me solo the blimp and let me get my blimp license. They said, we're not letting you solo the Goodyear blimp, one of the Goodyear blimps. And see, unless you own one, you're not getting a blimp license.
Yeah, and who owns a blimp? Yeah, right. Who owns a blimp other than a mega corporation? Nobody rents a blimp for a flight test. Yeah, I called around and I was like, hey, can I rent a blimp?
But I am fully trained in a blimp.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because as you know, I was in Europe and I did a lot of flights, and they were mostly Airbus, because we did a lot of flying around the EU, et cetera, et cetera. Went to Turkey, like I said. I did fly one Boeing back from Heathrow, which Heathrow is just, I can't believe what a major hub it is and how really ghetto it is, to be honest with you. It seems like they haven't moved forward since 1952, like last time Churchill flew out of there or something. Anyway, we flew a 777, Boeing 777 back from London Heathrow to Phoenix. And I got to tell you, I don't worry about stuff much, and I really didn't worry much. But for a split second, I thought, I hope the landing gear or the wing doesn't fall off or something, right? And I'm sure that there was how many people on a 777? 300. I'm sure there was 300 other passengers that probably crossed their mind that, is this Boeing up to par? And that never used to be until a few years ago. So what the heck has happened with Boeing? Why are we in this state?
First of all, it is important to maintain perspective, as obviously you know. If we had one major airliner crash every month with everyone aboard, or actually two crash into each other, so say lose 700 people every month, it would still be nothing compared to other modes of transportation. So I mean, we're orders of magnitude safer than we need to be for air to make sense.
Yeah, you're more
But
likely
still,
to die driving to the airport. You're
yes,
saying,
absolutely.
yeah.
But
Or in a Turkish taxi cab, I might add, but that's a whole nother story.
but still, America, especially U.S. flag carriers, have this amazing safety record. Basically, we've gone way more than a decade without anything big happening. There's like one person got sucked out of a hole in a plane, and you occasionally will have or a plane will overrun, maybe kill one person on the ground. There was a plane that overran. This very very occasionally happens that even though we're flying these metal tubes at nearly the speed of sound with all these people in them, when we do have a disaster, it tends to be just one or two people, but incidental to like a hole in the side of the fuselage. Like we could have lost somebody easily on that one in Alaska. There hadn't been a seatbelt worn by that kid, he would have gone out.
What happened? Remind us on that, because that was the start of the recent troubles.
That's where Spirit Aerosystems had not installed bolts, or somebody had not installed bolts in the plug in the fuselage. There's a plug where a door could be, but not needed with that configuration that airline had ordered, and it was improperly assembled, and they lost the plug.
And it started sucking stuff out, but not the no passengers.
All at once there's a door-sized hole, and so there was a kid. I mean, think how close you are to the door. There was a kid whose hair was in the slipstream. I mean, you're only inches from the outside of the plane.
Yeah.
But it happened at a low altitude, so that there wasn't a super extreme decompression. There wasn't a problem with getting oxygen.
Had it been at a high altitude?
I think they were 14,000 or something.
Okay, but had it been at 500 miles an hour or whatever, and 25,000, 30,000 feet, would that plane have come down?
No, it wouldn't have come down, but there would have been the depressurization event. The oxygen mass would drop. It'd be hard to imagine. It's a lot. There would have been terrible hypothermia, especially for that kid. He would be. Like, I've flown gliders pretty high where it's way below zero outside. Well, this would be way below zero. So it would have been a much more significant event at high altitudes. But still, I don't think we would have lost the airplane. And, kind of an indication of how tough these planes are is you got to go back a couple of decades, and the whole top came off of a Boeing going into Hawaii. I don't know if you remember that. It was amazing.
I don't. Is this like 80s or?
I forget what it was. Yeah, 80s maybe. Essentially, if you imagine like a 737 having like a first class section, they don't. But if you imagine the part forward of the wing, that whole top came off, came off, and all once they're flying a convertible, and they lost a flight attendant because there's the issue of you're not wearing your seatbelt. So the one thing I could say, and I'll give you a more concrete reason to do it in a minute, but don't worry, but do wear your seatbelt.
Okay.
There's all kinds of reasons to wear your seatbelt on a plane.
You're sitting there, do it. Yeah.
Any pilot, I'll tell you what, I don't think you'll ever see a pilot sitting in the back of an airliner not wearing their seatbelt.
Just because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You could hit turbulence. You could hit massive turbulence.
Turbulence is the answer. Turbulence is the answer. And plus, there was a rookie. I want to talk not just about Boeing, but I want to talk about woke airline recruiting. And there have been a couple of really, really dumb near losses of airlines recently, and they've both just been due to, one was human error, one was a combination of Boeing error and human error, but both of them put like a bunch of passengers into the ceiling. But in other words, the plane went to negative G's, and they get really hurt. There were 50 people hurt on the recent incident where the plane pitched over. Seriously, I think a lot of those 50 were seriously injured. Maybe not paralyzed, but I mean, it's no small deal to be thrown violently into the roof of the plane. Well, I'll cover that one now.
Okay.
So, there's a very cool feature of the Dreamliner, the Boeing 787. I love this feature, but if I had been the engineer, I would have anticipated this problem just because I know I would. There's some things you would have caught. The Dreamliner has a very cool electric seat, and the way the pilot, we're talking about the pilot and co-pilot seats, and when you want to get in, rather than climbing over, like the every other aircraft, you have to clamber over everything to get into the cockpit seat. It's always a physical exercise to get in there and to not strike the center console electronics with your shoe and all that stuff. So it's always saying, well, the 787 Dreamliner made that civilized because there's a button on the back of the seats, and when you push that button, the seat comes all the way back, and then the seat track. You got to look at a video. You just Google Dreamliner pilot seat, but when it comes all the way back, then the track makes a 90-degree turn to the outboard. So left on the pilot side and right on the co-pilot side, and then the seat moves sideways, and now you've got this big, giant, spacious area to walk up into ahead of the seat, and then the seat comes in and seats you.
Okay.
But then the seat comes in behind you and resumes its correct position. So what happened the other day was, and this was a known issue with this, it's very bad. Airplanes, whenever there's an airplane accident, it's never out of the blue. Every airplane accident, you've had multiple warnings. That's just the rule for airplane accidents. I can't explain it, but it's always the case. Any accident investigator will tell you there's a chain
warning
of
signs.
events.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Well, there's a little plastic cover to make it pretty. These are very beautiful cockpit, the Dreamliner. To make it pretty, there's a little plastic cover over the rocker switch that brings the seat forward or back. So a flight attendant was taking, I think, coffee to the pilots, and just accidentally rested her hand, the hand not handing coffee up, rested her hand on the center back of the pilot seat, which is something that you would naturally do, right?
Yeah.
Well, that little cover was known to be readily broken, and below that cover, she accidentally actuated the switch, and she actuated it in the forward position, and so then the switch stuck. It's a combination of a broken cover and a broken switch, and both of these were known defects that could happen.
Okay.
So now the seat is powering itself and the pilot into the control column.
Oh wow!
And the pilot's stomach pushed the control column forward before they could get it figured out, and that if you push hard enough, if an airplane's on autopilot and you push and push and push, eventually you hit an autopilot disconnect limit and the autopilot just comes off. And then all at once you're boom, like full down elevator or a lot of down elevator.
Okay, so he's up in the seat and pushing down full, and it pops the autopilot off. Okay.
And that puts everybody in the back that is not belted in smashed up into the ceiling. Well, then of course the pilot recovers. And then it's exactly like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, right? With you smash up into the ceiling, and then it's like when Wile E. Coyote, remember, he falls to the desert, and then the rock hits him after. After you've been smashed up in the ceiling, to add insult to injury, the pilot pulls up, and then at about 2 Gs now, you are slammed violently into the floor,
and the drink cart comes down on top of you.
Right? Yeah. So it's a bad scene. Anyway, that was one of these things. I mean, stuff happens.
It's kind of a fluke accident almost, but you should have a better switch cover.
Right? They never tell us. They never tell us. They never tell you who the pilots are in these things. Mm-hmm. Pilots used to not, but as a general rule, used to not be overweight. I'm guessing this had to be a pretty large pilot to uncontrollably push the control column forward like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to imagine how this
It's just a guess. Yeah. Okay, so that's one incident. So that sounds like that's some pilot error and just bad luck and this and that. And I wonder how many of these...
I'm not even sure if it's pilot error, except...
it's just a fluke accident.
I feel like I would have figured out a way. I feel like I would have understood that the seat was coming forward.
Yeah.
And I would have figured out a way to not have that outcome.
It's hard when you're there, though, and everything's happening.
Right.
I wonder, though, with a lot of these incidents, have they been happening? And now in this era of everything's filmed and on social media before you can blink your eye, it's like live streaming the door coming off. Is it just more prevalent in the public's eye?
No,
that
you
this
can
stuff's
look at
happening?
the NTS.
Okay,
no,
so that's my question.
Spike.
Okay, there is a huge spike. Okay,
and I should mention one other thing. There was another really recent, I think last year, incident, and it was Hawaii. It was I think it was a U.S. flag airliner departing Hawaii, and this was totally pilot error, and they managed to get disoriented and have some kind of crazy thing with the autopilot and almost dove into the ocean. And that was another incident where you had people floating around in the back that didn't have seatbelts on.
Yeah.
So there's lots of reasons besides all the traditional reasons to keep your seatbelt on.
Okay,
That's just good.
But you're looking at a data-driven factor here that you've seen a spike.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
A dramatic spike.
Anybody in the aviation industry will say the rate of air traffic controllers making huge mistakes, the rate of pilots making huge mistakes,
near misses, things like that.
Up.
Okay, all of that is piling. Okay, let's get to the why here in just a second, but I want to talk more Boeing. There's only two, you and I were texting, there's only really two major commercial airline manufacturers. I mean, there's others that are making small jets and this and that, but it's Boeing and Airbus. There's really no one else making in mass to scale the jet. You're an airline, you're either buying Boeing or Airbus for these big jets.
Unless you're Soviet. They have their own.
They have their own.
The Russians.
Okay. Or maybe a small, what we'd call puddle jumper, the regional ones.
Regional jets are largely made in Brazil.
Brazil has, what's that brand? Is that
Embraer?
Okay.
Embraer.
So you have those, but we're talking the bigger planes that
any big airliner
going across country, going across sea. Okay, you're getting a Boeing, you're getting an Airbus. Boeing's been around for a very long time. Airbus is like a conglomeration of a couple different European companies, I believe. That have come together. So and
Airbus is fundamentally now government. It's a government.
Okay, it's a government-owned company. Right. Boeing is a publicly traded company. The 737. So this is a very old design, I believe. The actual 737.
That's the one that Southwest Airlines exclusively flies.
Okay, so 737, but they've taken this, they've modified it, they've upgraded it, and then you get the 737 MAX, like 8, now 9, where my understanding is, and I watched that series on Netflix, the Downfall, the case against Boeing. So I thought it was pretty well done.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, I thought it was pretty well done. You might want to watch it. But my understanding is they put bigger engines on the original design.
Yeah, they're almost dragging the ground now. Those engines,
I mean, they're huge. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And see, they can't. And instantly, there's a government reason for this. The 737 is now a freak because it's not a clean sheet design, because it was designed for turbojet engines, and we've now evolved into turbofan engines, which have these huge cowlings. And the 737 is a small, compact airplane. The 737 was designed for air stairs. Back when the 737 came out, they would just push the stairs out to the ramp in many cases and have people walk up into the plane. I used to do that when I was little. And
I did that in Europe, by the way, a couple of times.
Yeah.
They still do that.
Yes. And so it was designed for that. And it's low to the ground, and it has no business it has no business with these big engines on it, and also has no business being as long as they are, because they keep adding people. The big engines generate more power, and they say, we can put another 50 people in. And so essentially they're stretched limos. A stretched limo is never as good a car as the car. They take a well-engineered car and they saw it in half, and then they put a plug to it. Yeah. Well, that's clearly not going to be a car that's going to win races like the original would.
Okay,
so stretched Taurus, and anyway, it's kind of a freak, but we had
two accidents though overseas a couple years back, because my understanding is the super large engines that they stuck on there. The way this documentary explained it causes because it's so much power, but then they designed software to compensate for that. But in order to get around certain classifications or going through the FAA process or whatever, they basically didn't really let people know. They didn't train them on the software. So the software.
Did not tell the.
Explain that. Explain what happened there.
So the airline pilots. In fact, I've got a friend, Lance, in Dallas that knows the 737 forwards and backwards. He comes from an aviation family. He's an airline pilot. He would be amazing to have on as a guest and talk about this in detail.
Yeah.
But yes, they didn't tell the pilots, because it's the craziest thing. But even more fundamentally, there's a couple of things about this. The reason they didn't tell the pilots, the reason they didn't want to rewrite the handbook, is related to the much bigger reason that the reason we're propping up this ancient design with it's kind of like it's almost unrecognizable, right? How many changes have occurred to the 737? And it's because the FAA for decades has made it essentially impossible to get through the certification process.
Okay.
So this abundance of caution that says it's going to cost $1 billion, it's like a pharmaceutical it's like a drug authorization, except there's plenty of money selling drugs and you can afford those, but there's not very much money selling airplanes compared to selling drugs. And so the airline industry cannot afford the FDA like FAA certification process.
Okay.
And so they do any possible thing to avoid it. And that's the explanation for a lot of issues with the 737. The 737 is this great design. And if they had been able to make bigger mods to it, it would probably have longer landing gear. It would just be more reasonably accommodative of the new giant engines.
Okay.
There's other weird things they do with the 737. It's hard to keep the tail from striking. It's so long now that they have to have special landing gear to kind of push it up into the air at rotation to keep the tail from striking.
That's when you're taking off and you got that pitch. Right. So basically they're having to make something more and more.
It's what engineers would call a kludge.
Okay, more and more complicated, and the more complicated you make something, the more likely there are to be failures. But with the software issue, it was auto-adjusting that pitch for the extra size of those engines, and the pilots in these two cases overseas, and forgive me, I think there's one in Africa, and I think there's one in Indonesia or Southeast Asia somewhere, they didn't know, and they tried to compensate manually, basically, because they didn't know what the heck was going on, and they only had a few seconds really to react, and by time... They had no time, and by that time, it was an uncontrollable dive, basically, and crashed and killed everybody.
Now, this could never have happened to my friend Lance, because American aviation is different. One of the reasons U.S. flag carriers are so safe is that American pilots learn differently. They normally come from a long culture of pilots. There's almost always... If you're an American airline pilot, your dad was an American airline pilot. I don't mean American Airlines, the brand. I mean, if you are a US pilot flying for a U.S. flag carrier, so was your dad.
Okay.
And you came to it. It's the way I came to flying. I soloed a glider when I was 14th birthday. I bought an old plane and rebuilt it myself, a really cheap plane, a plane that's the price of a used Hyundai, or something today. And fabric plane, I covered it. I flew it in very challenging conditions. You learn a lot more flying a terrible plane than you do flying a great plane, because on a terrible plane, things break all the time. You're flying in terrible weather. You don't have radar.
I had a couple cars like that, Bruce.
Yeah, you don't have radar. You don't have de-icing. Then I didn't do it, but all my friends got jobs flying checks to be canceled. They would get these ancient Learjets that, rather than scrap them, they'd say, you know what? It's not good for any other purpose, but it's maybe good enough to get these checks to like Aberdeen, South Dakota, because it's a long story, but they used to intentionally put banks in out-of-the-way places to increase the float on checks. And then the aviation industry responded to that by flying these checks to be canceled to these terrible locations, normally in terrible, icy, snowy weather. Well, a lot of airline pilots in the old days flew checks, and then they would fly then they'd be flight instructors. They would fly King Airs for charters, which is a small twin-engine plane. And they would fly for 20 years before they would ever even think about trying to fly a small real airliner. I mean, you came to airliner flying very slowly. And the point is, you knew airmanship. You knew the fundamentals of how planes worked. And as long as if I'm flying a plane, I'll make a bold statement. If my friend Lance or I or any other real pilot was flying a plane, as long as we've got the control surfaces still on, as long as nothing's broken off the plane, software is not going to kill us. As long as the stick is still connected to the control surfaces, we can fix it. But now, but it used to be third-party countries. Now, sadly, it's becoming us too. Third-party countries had this thing called ab initio pilot training. They would just go put an ad in the mall and say, hey, come be an airline pilot. And then you would go, in the most extreme cases in third-party countries, they had people that had never even been a passenger on an airliner, never seen a Cessna, anything small, but never even been a passenger on an airliner. And they would be trained in the simulator. And then at the conclusion of their training, they would be the right seater their very first time ever to be in the air. And ever, other than jumping off the bed as a child, their very first time to ever be airborne was to be the co-pilot of a airplane full of passengers. There wasn't a single training flight in an empty plane. Well, America's starting to get that way. Part of, and I do think it's a left versus right thing, because of an essential tenet of the left. It's kind of like when they say America needs immigrants because we need workers to replace like the retiring engineers. And so the more people come over the border, better, because we've got a lot of electrical engineers and physicists to replace, right? Well, a fundamental tenet of the left is that that it's the position, it's not the person, right? It's the position. You see, it's kind of like in California. When I lived in California, I heard a lot about that people need credentials to be able to advance in society. They need credentials, and so
Okay.
universities, especially community colleges and stuff, became so much about just awarding the credentials. Well, amazingly, we're doing that now in aviation. We're
Well,
starting to
is
deploy.
that what you're seeing, Bruce, with the increase in accidents or potential accidents, near misses, you name it? What do you, and I guess your contention is we've just opened this up, and is it diversity hires? Is it not the training? Is it the wokeness? Yeah. Let's just talk overall aviation industry in America.
Right. It's the concept that, every airline pilot historically talks like Chuck Yeager, because it's literally, the pilot comes on. I can't even do it, but the pilot comes on to the cabin address system, and he sounds like Chuck Yeager right there, right?
Yeah, okay.
And that's because it's a culture. It's something that's no longer acceptable. It's a culture of basically a culture of white men. There are spectacular women pilots too, and I've always loved women pilots. But again, the women pilots that I know that are spectacular are the daughters of aviators, and they grew up in aviation. They were still part of the culture. It's a lifelong commitment to aviation, and you know how to fly airplanes first before you. You know how to fly an airplane. Let me give you a real simple example. If you right now, to be an airline pilot, you can go to Florida, to Daytona. You could go to Embry-Riddle, or you could go to any number of the for-profit schools.
Okay.
And you show up never having flown, and you get as far as being a private pilot and a commercial pilot, and then you get your flight, and probably your commercial, which is no big deal, and then you get your flight instructor rating. So at this point, you've never seen anything other than Florida weather, and you're now teaching, because the way the schools can stay in business is they're getting the essentially free labor of the flight instructors, because the flight instructors need to get 1,500 hours because of the Colgan air disaster that your listeners can look up, Colgan air disaster. Because of that, the FAA said, we don't want anybody in the cockpit that doesn't have 1,500 hours and an airline transport certificate. Well, it's kind of like teaching to the SAT test, right? When I got my airline transport certificate, it was incidental. I was a good pilot, and I had way more than 1,500 hours, and I said, you know what, I should go get my ATP now. But I didn't wait for the 1,500 hours. I waited until I was, in my own estimation, a really good pilot, where it was justified for me to take the test, and I took it and passed it the first time. But that was incidental to me being a good pilot. Well, now it's kind of like when they started teaching to the test. Well, it's teaching to the test. Now everything is just about getting that certificate awarded. And you don't need to have ever seen ice.
You don't get the real experience.
Right. You don't.
Well, flying in Florida is different than flying out of Flagstaff, for example.
Very different. Well, that's what happened.
You know that.
In Colgan Air, they had two warm weather pilots that all at once were flying in the north, and they had ice on the plane. Ice is the most dangerous thing other than fire. The worst thing is to be on fire. The second worst thing is to have ice. They looked out. There's in the cockpit transcript, right before they killed an airliner full of people. The co-pilot looks out in the wing and says, "What is that stuff all over the wings? Is that ice?" And then the pilot looks out and says, "I don't know. I've never seen ice. I've never seen it. It's probably
not even
ice."
underground. I've lived in Florida my whole life. Yeah,
right. Both people in the front had never seen ice, which is the biggest threat to life other than fire. And actually, ice is much more common than fire. So by far the biggest risk that they're gonna very reliably going to be facing in their career as Northeastern airline pilots. They'd never seen it, and of course they handled it wrong and crashed.
Yeah.
And so it just amazes me that we're putting people. There's probably a similar argument to be said about surgeons, about medical schools that are lowering standards to meet diversity requirements. But it's in this case, it's not. It's even more like, I'm not sure it's the case. Maybe it's the case. Maybe doctors tend to be the children of doctors also. I don't know. It's very hard it's kind of hard for, like, I could never just wake up and say I want to be a doctor. It seems so icky and weird and foreign to me to be a life sciences
Yeah,
guy.
but if you're around it your whole life and you're hearing the lingo to talk and this, and I mean, Bruce, I've been around construction my whole life. I was born and raised in a house that was being gutted and remodeled all the time. So for me and my kids, it's second nature. And I think you're on to something here, because my dad was always gutting and remodeling things and not afraid to mess with electrical or carpentry or masonry or whatever. I got that way. My kids are that way. So it's like a multi-generational thing that.
So you've got a culture of doing physical things,
construction
with houses
things,
and farms and stuff.
So I could see that. That makes sense.
Yeah, like, you know how to grow corn somehow, and I have no idea how to grow corn. I would never get any corn. Right?
Yeah, I got another field coming in this year. So we're going to do it. I'm going to get you some corn.
So the problem is that you can't, in a leftist world, you can't make good airline pilots. That should be my assertion, unless you're willing to have a generation or two of accidents. Because eventually, of course, eventually, at least the next generation will learn. Like, let's say that we have a very large cohort of airline pilots of color, right? Well, then that means that there are going to be children of airline pilots of color that will have grown up with their mom or their two moms being airline pilots or whatever. I'm being so
and
so
they'll be
right now,
and they'll be good.
Then they will grow up in the culture and it'll be fine. But this is what I said.
You're not making. And let me just clarify this, because nowadays we want to clarify things. You're not making any kind of racial statement or anything. You're looking at the history of aviation, and you say that a lot of the people who have been in this for a really long time are traditionally male, traditionally white, and it's not that you're saying that those are the only qualified people that can do this. Your argument is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Bruce, your argument is that they've been in it for a long time, maybe even family generations, and it doesn't really matter the race or anything like that, but that's just the historic reality of where aviation's been. Okay, go ahead.
I would say not even maybe family. I would say always family.
Oh, okay.
It just doesn't happen otherwise. I mean, there's almost an apostolic succession of piloting. You grow up in your dad's lap, fine.
Yeah, no, that I hear you, and I just want to clarify that. So what do you think has happened that has caused that increase, that spike in accidents that you were talking about? The data is showing that the accident rates or near misses or near accidents have gone way up. Is it first of all, a political thing where companies are hiring based off of quotas or something, and they just don't have the experience?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You just have to go to United. Just Google United DEI, and they're absolutely proud of it.
Okay.
United even has a flight school. The other thing is, when most people of my generation, most of the old white male airline pilots got to it through complete passion. And very typically, the airplanes used to be unpainted, and we would polish airplanes for hours. It was like wax on, wax off, right?
Yeah.
We would polish airplanes for hours to get 1 hour of flight training.
The natural aluminum color. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we had so much skin in the game. Well, now I'll give you a couple of examples. Now, if you go to United and you just go to United Aviation Careers, they have a flight school that's free if you qualify, and it's diversity criteria. And then there's videos of people taking their first flights in these planes, and then the punchline is that, well, in 6 months or a year or 2 years, well, it's the same thing. These people will very quickly be instructors in these same airplanes they're learning in, and then as soon as they can get 1,500 hours total in, then they'll be in airline cockpits. And so there's no skin in the game, and plus they're not going to be exposed to any conditions. Like, I've been to practically every airport in the country. It's amazing, my love book, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of airports. Well, you've got people that are going to the airlines that have done all of their work in Phoenix, like their entire flying career has been in Phoenix, and or in Florida. And so the thing is, it has nothing to do with the aptitude of people. There is absolutely no reason to think that Black people, Hispanic people, gay people, any group would be less awesome at being airline pilots, but their dads weren't. Okay. And it's totally not their fault that their dads weren't or their moms weren't. It's totally not their fault. But now society has to make a choice, and it's pretty clear the choice they made. Society says, are we going to let this go on forever? Or are we willing to tolerate 20 or 30 years of accidents to fix it? And
Oh,
we've
that's a scary
decided to
thought.
tolerate 20 or 30 years of accidents to fix it.
That's a scary thought. So that's on the whole aviation side, as far as pilots, probably air traffic control, maybe even
Air
people
traffic
working.
control is even worse. I think I did a radio show. Didn't I do my radio show where we fired there used to be, I remember this on your radio show, so loyal listeners will remember. There used to be a network of colleges that gave degrees in air traffic control.
Yeah.
And then those people were fast-tracked into the very elaborate air traffic training that the FAA did. And then finally you worked your way up to a controller. And it took a lifetime to work your way up to being a controller at like Kennedy. Those people were amazing. It was absolutely merit, and you had to be superhuman to do it. It was like doing, what happened during the Obama administration, and it was shocking, is I think it was Obama administration. It's well known, and we can find the radio show and you can post a link to it. But there were, I think, 3,600 incoming students that had done the exact right thing the FAA had wanted them to do and gone to one of these four-year colleges and gotten a degree in air traffic control, which is a degree that doesn't have a lot of other utility. The FAA just overnight said, these people are way too male and way too white, and we're disqualifying all of them. All of those applications are being trashed, and we're going to recruit directly from the street. And it was amazing, the criteria, because the criteria was you wrote an essay about your life experiences, and basically it was a lived experiences, meaning, and I mean like on the urban street. Your lived experience was the biggest
factor
points boost
to
getting hired. And then similarly, there's this amazing there's this amazing video from the FAA, a meeting where the FAA was discussing diversity, and one of the FAA leaders said, "Yes, this is why we're doing ramp to cockpit." And ramp to cockpit literally means what there. There's this notion. Like I said, there's this notion that it's all about position, not about the person. And they're saying, look, the person who is throwing the baggage onto the plane is just as valid a human being as the pilot, as the guy as the white male that's sitting in the front left that has been doing it for 40 years. And we want to do ramp to cockpit. And that's literally a term. That's an official FAA term.
Ramp to cockpit. So meaning,
meaning fast track.
You're working up. You're working up. So let's go back to like maybe the person who's sweeping the floor in the big company, and then eventually they become CEO because they worked up through every department, every division. You're basically saying, hey, you're throwing bags this week, but before you know it, we can train you real quick, and you can be flying this plane.
That actually would probably improve Boeing if we randomly picked one person off the factory floor and put them as the chairman.
That would probably be better than what they're doing now.
That would probably be an improvement. But normally you have to have skill to do that. So ramp to cockpit. And so I kind of jokingly said, what, we need border to cockpit. We just need to go stand at the southern border and say, hey, do you want to be an airline pilot?
Yeah. I mean, why not? You might get a better result. Let me ask you this, Bruce. Because when I watched that documentary on Downfall, the case against Boeing, they talk specifically about, and now Boeing, by the way, is the CEO is going to resign here at the end of the year, or whatever,
but
coming up.
But what's crazy is he said, I'm resigning, but not until next year because I got to fix this mess.
I got to fix this first.
He clearly cannot fix this mess.
Yeah. Okay. And then the chairman of the board's not rerunning, and then there was somebody else high up. It was like total
I think
change.
All this ready to retire.
It's a mess. So it's like, do you want to go down?
That's a whole year to carry home office supplies.
I need to get toilet paper home and things like that, right? But obviously they're in the spotlight all the time. In that documentary I watched, they blamed a lot of it on they pushed a product way too fast, the 737 Supermax, because Airbus was really beating them up and they were going down. Is it a fair assessment to also make not only the DEI stuff though, Bruce, the fact that we live in an era of quarterly reports now?
Everything is short term.
Yeah, short term. So talk about that a bit and what you think are the reasons Boeing is taking the hit.
Yeah. Here's the main problem with Boeing that I would say there are two problems with Boeing, but the first problem is that Boeing had a long history of being really serious about airplane engineering. Like when you've been to Sedona, have you seen the Stearman, the old biplane that they give rides in?
No.
Sedona. Well, but it's the most famous old biplane. It's got the big round engine. Most people have seen a Stearman in their lives. That's a Boeing.
Okay. So they've been doing this a long time.
they've been doing this a long time. It's always about a passion for aviation. And then also, I love Heath kits. Remember, one of the things that every astronaut that I've ever talked to did RC airplanes. Before that, they did control line airplanes. They were ham radio. They had a ham radio license as a kid. They built tissue paper and balsa models as a kid. And they also built Heath kits. That was fundamental to how you became an engineer. I love Heath kit. And they make electronic kits. Well, the Heath kit was essentially out of Boeing because Boeing, who was a lumber, he was an aircraft fanatic, but his money came from being a lumber magnate.
Okay.
And so he hired Heath, I think it's Edward Heath. I think he hired Edward Heath to help him design and make great airplanes. And then that same Heath ended up being the Heathkit company. So, and there are still airplanes that if you go to Oshkosh, you see the old airplanes. There are still Heath Parasols, which is an airplane under his name. But then subsequent early Boeings were under the Boeing name because Boeing was writing the checks.
So
but there was
a long history.
Yeah, for a long time, Boeing was run by engineers. And then what happened is Boeing redefined success. Boeing redefined the ingredient for success as, rather than having amazing aerospace engineers, they redefined it as management and lobbying. And the actual building of airplanes became they literally would talk about airplanes like widgets, right? I mean, if you go to MBA school, your widgets, you see this a lot because you'll see a CEO, like the CEO of, I'll just pick a company, Caterpillar. The CEO of Caterpillar comes from upper management of Procter and Gamble because the idea is that management is management and companies are companies, right? Well, I would say that selling soap and building giant mining equipment are really different.
Very different, yeah.
And I would not go to P&G to recruit the next president of Caterpillar, but that's exactly what Boeing did. Boeing believes in management and believes in lobbying. A lot of
companies made this mistake, Bruce. Remember when Apple really stunk? And after Steve Jobs left, we're talking 80s, and they brought in the guy from Pepsi, I believe.
Well, remember,
and it was much different to sell Pepsi than computers.
Yeah, I think it was the last radio show I did for you, which was last year. I said nothing of significance has happened since '69.
And I really I gave you flack on that, and I'm going to put a link of that with that episode because I think you were spot on. Because I was like, oh, come on, Bruce. But the more I've thought about that and the reaction I got from that show we did, that really everything's kind of. I mean, we've got a toaster. We have we have all this. It's starting to move. We have all these things, but it's just become derivatives of the old thing. Yeah, it's just I can hit a button on my toaster instead of there's some new features, but it's still just a toaster. It's still just a fridge. I still just got a car. The planes, we're just adding big engines onto it,
there hasn't. And Apple was amazing in terms of design. I used to be married to a designer. I'm really interested in design. Apple was amazing in terms of design and the user experience, and that was great. But that user experience was actually invented by Xerox. Xerox Palo Alto Research Center invented it, and then, like a lot of early companies, their mission was to lose a ton of money as the original inventors.
Yeah.
And then Apple picked the moment and improved that. It's called the desktop metaphor. All of Apple's success is based on improving the desktop metaphor, but that was invented by Xerox.
Yeah, they took that the user interface where
the trash can and the graphical
that was all there.
All invented by Xerox.
Yeah. You know what? If you want to watch a good docudrama on it, The Pirates of Silicon Valley, it came out like in the 90s. They did a good
Silicon, because Silicon Valley is the women.
Did I say Silicon? Okay, Silicon. Yeah. Well, I'm just a guy who tears down walls and does construction work and things like that. So what do I know? Bruce, so what do you see for Boeing? Since we live in a world that really has two major companies that creates these big planes that so many people use, there's about 10,000 planes in the sky at any given moment on average worldwide. I mean, it's crazy if you think about it, how many flights are going on. What do you see as the future and what is going to happen here? Can they correct, or is a major accident a potential and then they're just like bankrupt and the government takes them over or something? I mean, what do you see coming? How do we fix this and get back to it?
I'm sure there will be multiple accidents. I don't think that will be the end of Boeing. I'm sure there'll be multiple accidents.
Boeing isn't going to go broke. They're too big to fail. They're too vital to national security. And
remember, Boeing has said this company stands or falls based on lobbying. That's why they moved east. The Boeing managers used to be able to look out they used to be in elevated offices over the factory floor in Everett,
watching
Washington.
the planes getting built. Yeah.
And then they said, you know what? These are just widgets, and we don't care about the specifics of their airplanes. We want to move to Chicago to a skyscraper. Yeah. And now they're moving to, I think, Virginia to be even closer.
To be by DC. Yeah. So they can lobby.
They want to be by DC because Boeing stands or falls based on lobbying. So I think Boeing will be fine. I have no question that there will be accidents caused by controller error and by pilot error. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. That doesn't mean we should quit flying airliners because overall it'll still be safe enough. But we are going to have major losses. We're having so many near misses that every week I think it'll be.
Well, sadly, are we going to become like so many things in our society numbed to these things? Like,
yes.
For example, okay, so like for example, I mean, we hear about shootings that happen. We hear about this or that tragedy. And it's just like, okay, 12 hours later, next news cycle. It's just...
I got to show you Taylor Swift here real quick.
We move on. Oh, sleeping in the sun there. Yeah, this is a serious time. So, and Bruce, I know you need to go take a nap pretty soon too. But to wrap it up,
anyway, so let me just say this about Boeing. So there is a solution to this, and Airbus is better at it than Boeing because Airbus invented it. Real pilots, like my friend Lance or my friend Frank, real pilots never liked Airbus because Airbus planes are highly automated.
Okay.
Like you can't pull the stick back on Airbus and stall it. It just refuses. It keeps you like in a walled garden of the flight envelope. Well, Boeing will do that. Boeing will have to adopt that because we're going to have too many incompetent pilots and it's going to be up to automation in the planes.
Okay, so we're going to that world.
Boeing will, we're going to survive the replacement of the experienced pilots with inexperienced pilots by just automating everything.
Okay, so you're going to get to more of a world where eventually the pilot is less and less an integral part to it. Probably they're going to. I mean, they could fully automate it. It'll be like a Tesla in the sky where it's taking off and landing on its own.
I think they'll probably want one pilot up there just because the passengers won't accept zero pilots. But it's going to be fundamentally automated.
It's going to be fun, and they're going to do that to take that equation out. Okay.
I think Boeing will make it on that basis, and also because Boeing will get bailed out to whatever extent necessary.
Well, yeah, and keep in mind, Boeing's a major defense contractor too.
Right, although they've made a lot. They've been in hot water with the Defense Department over lots of engineering problems. I mean, there's like the DoD is not much happier with them than the airline flying public is happier with them. They're just screwing up across the board. But again, that's not the criteria. And the one last thing I'll leave you. Sounds like we don't have time for this, but if your readers want to see something amazing, because Boeing is so committed to the commoditization of widgets and not even thinking of them as airplanes, that they took the part of Boeing that built the planes and spun it off as a company called Spirit Aerosystems. And the Spirit Aerosystems is like super woke. Are we supposed to use the term woke? They're like super woke. And if you want proof of that, don't just take my opinion of it. Just Google Spirit Aerosystems Dream Team. And you'll see that Spirit Aerosystems does, it's just a bunch, they're just showing that they're women, all their new hire women or new hire engineers are women. Well, I have the highest respect for women engineers, but all the women engineers I know would have been showing engineering accomplishments. In this case, the women just strutted down a hallway in mass.
I know what you're talking about. I know Bruce. Right. I saw it on British. So I flew British Air from Phoenix to London on that wing when I went to Europe. Which, by the way, British Air was especially not the best airline. It's not the crown jewel of the empire anymore. Let's go with that.
Used to be great. I flew British Concorde. It was amazing.
Yeah, they gave us a half bottle of water. This was on the flight from Greece, actually, back to London. Half bottle of water and a cracker, and then they tried to sell us tea. I mean, the British are trying to sell tea on these 5-hour flights now. Awful.
I kept some menus from Concorde flights. You'll have to post one on your website.
Yeah,
because it's amazing.
Send me that. Yeah,
it's amazing what we used to have.
When we left, though, we did take a British airline from Phoenix to Heathrow, heading over to Europe. They had the safety video in the beginning. It was I should have just filmed it. It was laughable. It was a total diversity video where they had to show women and minorities and all that. They had the exact checkbox of everything. I was laughing at the thing, Bruce. I was like, here's how you click your seatbelt, and then they go to the next diversity. It's all about diversity.
Imagine that same video, except instead of showing you representative actors representative of passenger demographics or wished for passenger demographics. Imagine if that was showing you the actual engineers that designed your airplane. Because if you Google Spirit Aerospace Dream Team, which is essentially part of Boeing, they spun it off because the managers didn't want to be bothered with it, but they're essentially captive to Boeing. They make Boeing's fuselages.
It's the Dream Team.
What they, think of all the discarded white male engineers that were not in that video. I mean, Boeing said, here's our dream team of engineers. And they showed, and also, it's not even that they're women. They're too young. I know as an engineer, like when I was a young engineer, it's a good thing that old people were around to tell me what would really happen with my designs, because I had not yet seen it all. Yeah. Well, every one of these women was too young. I could just tell categorically that they were too young to be making the final decisions. And maybe they weren't making the final decisions, but hopefully there's somebody that's old that's seen a lot of things break that's making the final decisions. Because when you're young, it's kind of like when you're young and you think you know everything about politics, you don't have to study world history. Well, when you're a young engineer, you say, hey, this will work. This electric aircraft seat plastic switch cover, it'll be fine. And the old guy would probably say, look, everything that's plastic breaks. Yeah. And what if this broke and rammed the pilot uncontrollably into the control yoke? What would happen then? I mean, that's the kind of thing an older.
And just where you're putting the button too, there's a chance that someone's going to accidentally, once that plastic cover breaks. It's practical, real world life experience that you just don't have when you're younger. And I think that's a big thing.
So the engineers need to be old and experienced, and they've seen everything, and so do the pilots. Because then the first time a pilot gets transition training to the 787, if I was in the 787 sim getting training.
That transition. Okay, sorry.
I would say, I would look at that. No, yeah. I would look at that switch. I would look at that switch on the back of the seat, and I'd say, well, it was only a matter of time until you say stewardess, right? Steward. Only a matter of time until a flight attendant is going to touch this, because every flight attendant in the entire history of aviation has always put their left hand on the back of the pilot seat while they're handing the coffee.
Yeah, but they didn't know that because they don't have the experience. Yeah,
they didn't. And this switch is right there, and it's a cheap plastic cover. And what if I get rammed into the control column? Well, I would have a plan right away. I would have a plan before I ever flew that plane to say, I know where the circuit breaker is for this switch, for the seat motor, so I can pull it if I have to, just in case this is. But anyway, yeah.
Now you just don't have the experience and all of that. All right, Bruce. Send me the pictures of the Concorde menu, because you have flown the Concorde,
Concorde menu.
And real quick, you don't fly commercially anymore. And you've discussed this on the show before.
Not because of fear, just because of annoyance.
Annoyance, yeah, because it's gotten. Look, I started flying. Internationally and all that in the mid to late 90s, right? And longer haul flights. And I can tell you it's changed dramatically just since then. Now it's just sardines packed in.
Yeah, I don't fly.
It's rough.
Crazy, the reason it's important, our friend Elisha, he and I both big time believers in physical media. We have DVDs and VHS tapes. I've got lots of laser discs and stuff. One of the things that allows things to be so bad is that people are forgetting how good things were. Like I encourage people to watch Father Knows Best and Marcus Welby and Leave It to Beaver, and I'll say that's really how we lived. You really did just let your kids run around. There was no crime. Everything was perfect. There was no graffiti. There was no trash. That's how we lived. Well, when I send you a Concorde menu, of course, the Concorde was the best of the best. But basically, all airline food was great, pretty great. And even in the very cheapest discount American Airlines, you could order ahead an All-American burger. I used to always order up an All-American burger in advance when I bought my ticket. But yeah, the thing is, it's Orwell, the most succinct description. And everybody should not only read 1984 at least 10 times, but keep reading it until they get everything and realize that it 100% maps to the current reality. Well, the explanation for airlines is the chocolate meme in 1984. Because, in 1984, a lot of people don't get that book or the movie the first time, and then they watch it more and more and say, oh, yeah, another parallel. Well, the parallel is that the Ministry of Information says, you hear in the background earlier in the movie that, the chocolate ration has been increased to 30 grams. Good news, citizens. Well, then about a week later, you hear in the background the chocolate ration has been increased to 20 grams. It's always an increase,
Yeah.
but to less. Well, I mean, people, I think when people look at a movie of the complete opulence of airline travel, I think they just think that that's CGI or
it's
something.
Fake. Totally fake.
I think they think I think it's like the same as denying the moon landing. I think they just say, no, it's not possible. There's no way that people could have behaved. There's no way that people would dress nice and bathe and wear cologne and smell appropriate and be civil to each other.
Yeah, it's lost. There's parallels in going and visiting Rome once again and seeing how advanced the Romans were and what they were able to build, the scope and scale of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, and viaducts and stuff.
Yeah, how that was lost. Definitely by the people.
Look how smart Plato and all those guys were.
And the Greeks before that.
Aristotle.
Yeah. But how that was lost by the, say, 400s and definitely by the 500s, and people looked at that and probably were astounded and said, no, was this built by the gods? Was this built? I mean, no man could build this.
There were three big recent, if I just go back only a couple thousand years or 3,000 years or something, the recent developments were the Roman civilization, and then like the Iron Age, then the wheel was in there somewhere, but the main thing was mechanization, like iron and steam engines. And then there was the 60s. And then after the 60s, nothing interesting happened. After the 60s, we quit. Everything has just been incremental improvement. And it's trivially easy, because as soon as you went from slide rule to calculator, and as soon as you went from vacuum tubes to integrated circuits, then we should have, we went to the moon in the 60s with essentially no technology.
Yeah.
Well, we should be Star Trek by now. We should have this Starship Enterprise, and we should have giant thriving cities on the moon and Mars if we had kept at that same pace of integration. But it's kind of like this. It's kind of like it's typical of like an employee. Let's say you go to an employee and you say, hey, like back in my generation, if I got an electronic calculator, I'd say, this electronic calculator makes things 10 times faster. I can get 10 times more work done, right? Well, now if you went to an employee and said, here's a new breakthrough, and the employee would say, oh, this is great. Instead of 40 hours a week, I can work 4 hours a week. I mean, there's two ways to use the technological breakthrough. One is to quiet quit, but over it. And the Biden administration talks about worker productivity being up, but it's not the workers. That means that the worker productivity they're talking about is integrated circuits.
Yeah. Hey, I'm working 4 hours. I'm working 4 hours now, but imagine if you did 40 with all that technology and productivity.
Yeah, imagine
what we could accomplish. Yeah.
We would have cured cancer. We would have solved everything. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Bruce, send me that menu.
There's my rant.
Send me that menu on the Concorde, and let's do this. Let's not make it 4 months, because that's about how it's been.
I've been enjoying my sabbatical, though.
Yeah, enjoy it.
See, now you got me all riled up. I wasn't
I know.
Politics, but now I'm all riled up.
Hey, but I like doing it poolside. I didn't see the margarita there. We'll talk with you soon. I appreciate it.
Here, I'll show you a flower, too. Here's the flower.
Nice. There you go. Nice. For people listening, nice setup there poolside. Right. We're jealous. All right, thanks, Bruce.
See you later.
Thanks for watching this video. Thank you to everyone listening on the podcast as well. Do me a favor right now. Please subscribe. I appreciate everybody that's doing it. Subscribe, and share with your friends. If you've already done that, leave a comment. That helps us out a lot, and we'll see you back here real soon.